Imagine walking into a room and right on a table in front of you, there's just this messy, scattered pile of metal gears.
Okay.
And next to them, you see some tightly coiled springs, maybe a polished glass face, and a couple of thin, delicate metal hands. Now, if you just stand there staring at that pile of metal parts, can it tell you what time it is?
Absolutely not. I mean, it's just a pile of debris, right?
Right. But if you take those exact same parts and you assemble them, and like more importantly, if you make those parts interact.
Ah, the interaction.
Exactly. Like the tension of the spring turns a specific gear which catches the teeth of another gear, which incrementally moves that metal hand. Suddenly, something entirely new happens. The ability to tell time just appears out of nowhere.
Yeah, and that is what scientists call an emergent property. You only get a working clock when the parts cooperate.
It's so cool.
It really is. It is the ultimate scientific magic trick. The whole suddenly becomes much greater than the sum of its isolated parts. And honestly, if you want to understand anything in biology or ecology, that is the exact lens you have to look through. A system is always more than just a pile of parts.
Well, okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for today's deep dive is to explore the Bioforge Educator Lab materials, specifically looking at cross-cutting concept number 4, which is systems and system models.
Right.
So we're looking at this stack of sources that explain how scientists use systems thinking to make sense of the natural world. And we aren't just skimming the surface here. We're going to trace this from the invisible high-velocity chemical chaos of a single cell all the way up to massive, sprawling ecosystems in the Alaskan wilderness.
Yeah, and the necessity of this approach really comes down to human limitation.
What do you mean?
Well, the natural world is just unimaginably complex. You can't just walk outside into an Alaskan forest, look around, and instantly comprehend every single chemical reaction, every fungal network under the soil, every animal behavior happening simultaneously.
Right. Your brain would short circuit.
Exactly. The sheer volume of data would overwhelm your brain in a fraction of a second. So systems thinking is essentially a cognitive superpower. It allows you to mentally draw a line around a specific, manageable piece of the universe so you can actually study it.
So if I'm looking at this imaginary clock on the table, where does the clock end and the table begin? Like, how do scientists actually agree on what they're looking at without getting distracted by the rest of the room?
Well, that is the fundamental problem of boundaries. Before you can analyze a system, you have to define its limits.
Okay.
A boundary is simply the line that separates your system from the external environment. And sometimes that boundary is an undeniable physical wall, like the glass of a terrarium is a physical boundary.
Oh, sure.
Or the semi-permeable membrane wrapped around a single living cell. That's a physical barrier acting like a microscopic bouncer, deciding what gets in and what gets out.
But reading through the Bioforge field journals, I noticed something that completely shifted my perspective on this. The boundary isn't always a physical wall, is it?
No, it's not.
Because it seems like sometimes scientists just make the boundary up.
They absolutely do. Because the boundary is a tool and you are the one holding it. Often a boundary is just a conceptual line drawn by the scientists, and it is entirely dictated by the question they are trying to answer.
You mean an example of that?
Okay, think about an Alaskan tide pool.
Okay, got it.
If you want to study how a single sea anemone feeds, your conceptual boundary might be drawn just around that one animal.
Right.
But if you want to study how changing ocean temperatures affect the whole tidal zone, your boundary has to expand. Now, it includes the rocks, the water, the crabs, the kelp, the sunlight. The physical space didn't change at all. The boundary you projected onto it changed because your question got bigger.
Wow, okay. That brings us to the actual mechanics of the system. Once you draw that line, you have to figure out what is crossing it, right?
Exactly.
So let's trace this physically.
Right.
Say my boundary is just a single frond of kelp floating in that tide pool. What's actually happening there?
Well, you look for the inputs and the outputs.
Okay.
An input is any matter, energy, or information that crosses the boundary into your system. And an output is what leaves. So with your kelp frond, the inputs are the kinetic energy of sunlight penetrating the water and dissolved carbon dioxide gas entering the plant cells.
And once those inputs are inside the boundary, they don't just sit there doing nothing.
Yeah.
This is where the magic happens, right? The interaction.
Yeah, exactly. The parts of the system, which scientists usually call components, they start reacting.
So inside the kelp, the energy from the sun is used to physically break the chemical bonds of the carbon dioxide and water, like literally rearranging them.
Yes.
The interaction is the photosynthesis itself. And the output The stuff that crosses the boundary to leave the system is oxygen gas bubbling up to the surface.
And that's the key. Without tracing that physical mechanism, the inputs crossing the line, the parts interacting, and the outputs leaving, you aren't really studying a system. You're just making a list of parts.
Right, the interactions are the driving forces.
They are everything.
I want to scale this up because the Bioforge materials have this fascinating way of describing how systems stack on top of each other.
Oh, I love this part.
Yeah, I started picturing it like a set of nested mixing bowls in a kitchen. You know, you have tiny systems sitting inside of medium systems, sitting inside of massive systems.
Yeah, that nested structure is literally how life functions. Like, let's look at the cellular level first.
Okay.
Inside the boundary of a cell membrane, you have internal parts. Organelles like the nucleus and the mitochondria. The mitochondria are a perfect subsystem.
Because they have their own inputs and outputs.
Exactly. They take in glucose and oxygen as inputs. Inside their own microscopic boundaries, this chaotic cascade of chemical interactions occurs to produce ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell, and then the outputs are water and carbon dioxide.
But that cell is just one tiny bowl inside a much bigger bowl. So let's look at an entire organism like an Alaskan hare.
Okay, the snowshoe hare.
Yeah. The outer boundary of the hare is its skin and fur. But inside that boundary, the hare isn't just a giant soup of random cells. It has these incredibly specialized subsystems working together, like a nervous subsystem, a respiratory subsystem, a circulatory subsystem.
And their interdependence is literally a matter of life and death. The Bioforge curriculum uses a brilliant example for this called the sudden startle response.
All right.
Picture the Alaskan hare sitting perfectly still in a snowbank.
Right, and suddenly a lynx steps out from behind a tree.
Yeah.
The visual information of that predator is an input. It crosses the boundary of the hare through its sensory receptors, its eyes, and instantly, the nervous subsystem fires off this high-voltage electrical signal to the respiratory and circulatory subsystems. It's essentially screaming through the body like, we have a massive problem, we need to move right now.
And the physical mechanism there is incredible to think about. The lungs, your respiratory subsystem, immediately increase the rate of gas exchange, pulling in massive amounts of oxygen, and then the heart, the circulatory subsystem, pumps frantically to rush that oxygen-rich blood down to the muscle tissues in the legs.
And the muscle tissues use that oxygen to burn the ATP energy made by the mitochondria we just talked about.
Yes.
The nested bowls are all interacting. The emergent property of all those subsystems communicating is the hare exploding out of the snowbank and escaping the lynx. If those systems were just a pile of parts that didn't talk to each other, the hare would just be dinner.
It would be over immediately. Now take that entire hare and the lynx and put them inside an even bigger mixing bowl.
The ecosystem.
Exactly. At this scale, your conceptual boundary might be the geographic ridgeline of an entire mountain watershed. Everything inside that valley is your system.
The mechanisms at the ecosystem scale are just mind-blowing. Let's look at a classic Alaskan salmon stream.
Oh, this is a great example.
Right, because I always thought of a fish as just a creature living its life in the water.
Mhm.
But in systems thinking, a spawning salmon is actually a chemical input for the terrestrial forest.
It really is. You have to trace the nitrogen. Salmon spend years out in the open ocean, which is entirely outside our watershed boundary.
Right, way outside the green box.
Exactly. And while they are out there, they are accumulating marine-derived nitrogen in their bodies. When it's time to spawn, they migrate hundreds of miles up the rivers, physically transporting thousands of tons of that ocean nitrogen across the boundary into the freshwater ecosystem.
And the interaction happens when a brown bear or a bald eagle wades into the river, catches that salmon, and drags it up onto the riverbank into the forest. The bear eats what it wants and leaves the rest. When that fish decomposes, that heavy marine nitrogen literally seeps into the soil and fertilizes the root systems of the surrounding trees. Like, scientists have actually tracked marine nitrogen isotopes in the wood of giant spruce trees deep in the forest.
It's wild.
The trees are physically built out of the ocean.
They really are. The forest grows larger and denser because of the fish. It is a profound interaction. And you see similar macro-level interactions in, like, the moose-willow feedback loop.
Oh, right, where a population of wolves interacts with a population of moose through predation.
Yeah, and it isn't just about the wolves getting a meal. The wolves are architects of the forest. By keeping the moose population from exploding, the wolves regulate how heavily the moose browse on the willow thickets.
So if you remove the wolves, the moose eat all the willows down to the ground.
Exactly. And when the willows die back, it means songbirds lose their nesting habitats and beavers lose the wood they need to build dams. The predator-prey interaction just cascades through the entire system.
The complexity is staggering. Which kind of begs the question, if an ecosystem is that complicated, with millions of variables constantly shifting, how do scientists actually study it? I mean, you can't put a watershed in a laboratory.
No, you can't. Which is why they build system models.
Oh, okay.
The sources explain that when a system is too massive, like a forest, or too microscopic, like a cell, or maybe moving too slowly over centuries to observe in real time, scientists create simplified representations.
A model.
Right. And a model can take a bunch of different forms. It could be a 3D physical object, like a plastic cell. It could be a conceptual model, like a food web diagram mapping out who eats whom. Or it could be a massive mathematical simulation running on a supercomputer.
Okay, but their entire purpose is to explain unobservable mechanisms or predict future behavior, right?
That's the goal.
See, I have to push back on this, though. A model, by definition, is a simplified version of reality.
Yeah.
It intentionally leaves details out. So isn't a model technically always wrong? Like, why would a scientist rely on a simple model if they know for a fact it is missing pieces of the puzzle?
That's a great question, and you are hitting on the fundamental limitation of all models. And it's something scientists are acutely aware of. Yes, every model is quote-unquote wrong in the sense that it is incomplete.
Right.
Like a plastic 3D cell model sitting on a middle school science desk is totally static. It completely fails to convey the violent, high-velocity chemical storms happening inside a real living cell.
Or a hand-drawn food web diagram of a forest might completely ignore the millions of microscopic decomposers in the soil, or the fact that half the bird species migrate away in the winter.
Exactly.
So if it's flawed, why use it?
Because in complex systems, simplicity is a feature, not a bug.
Really?
Yeah, it's about separating the signal from the noise. If you are trying to predict what will happen to the willow trees if the wolf population drops, a simple 3-variable model, wolves, moose, willows, gives you a very clear prediction. If you try to build a, quote, perfect model by adding 50 species of insects, 20 species of fungi, and daily weather fluctuations.
The math just explodes.
Exactly. The math becomes so noisy and chaotic that predicting that primary predator-prey dynamic becomes mathematically impossible. You simplify the model so you can actually use it.
Oh, that makes total sense. Do you leave the noise out on purpose to see the big gears turning? And the sources also make it clear that models aren't written in stone. Science is a process of constant revision, right? Like when new evidence arrives, the model has to change.
Absolutely. Honestly, the entire history of science is just the history of humans updating our models.
Like the early cell models.
Yeah. In the early 1800s, scientists like Schwann and Schleiden developed early cell theory models, but their model included this idea of spontaneous generation.
Oh, yeah, they thought cells could just crystallize out of fluid like rock candy forming on a string.
Right, which sounds crazy now, but that was their model. Later on, scientists like Rimac and Virchow observed actual cell division under better microscopes. And that evidence proved spontaneous generation was impossible. Cells only come from other cells. So the model was dismantled and rebuilt.
And today, the models have evolved into something almost unrecognizable from those early sketches. Like, natural resource agencies in Alaska aren't just drawing food webs on chalkboards anymore.
No, definitely not.
They are running incredibly dense, climate-integrated computational models to manage commercial fisheries. They plug in real-time inputs like shifting ocean temperatures and zooplankton populations to project future salmon runs and set sustainable harvest limits. They use models to actively manage the survival of the environment.
And, when we talk about long-term observation, managing environments, and understanding the deep relationships within a system, we really have to look beyond a purely Western scientific framework.
Tell me more about that.
Well, there is a system of empirical observation that has been practiced continuously in Alaska for over 11,000 years.
Right, because we've been talking a lot about drawing boundary boxes to isolate systems, separating the inside from the outside. But honestly, that feels a bit arrogant. Nature doesn't actually have neat little boxes.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So, are there scientific approaches that study the system without the observer pretending they're somehow separate from it?
That is the crucial distinction between Western reductionism and traditional ecological knowledge, or tech.
Oh.
Western science historically relies on breaking systems down into isolated parts to study them in a vacuum. The ideal Western scientist stands strictly outside the boundary box, holding a clipboard, trying to be a completely objective external observer.
But the Bioforge materials emphasize that many Alaska Native communities like the Inupiat, Yup'ik, Athabascan, Tlingit, and Haida approach systems holistically.
Yes.
In tech, you don't smash the clock apart to understand it. You study the relationships. And more importantly, humans are never seen as external observers. Humans are reciprocal, active partners living deeply inside the boundary of the ecosystem.
Exactly. Tech recognizes that the observer is a component of the system interacting with the other parts. And we need to be very clear here because sometimes people get this wrong. Traditional ecological knowledge is not folklore or like quaint decoration for a science textbook.
No, not at all.
It is a rigorous, deeply empirical system of data collection.
It's longitudinal data on a scale that Western science can hardly fathom. A modern university study might last 5 years, maybe 20 if they are really lucky with funding.
Right.
But tech represents generations of systematic observation, testing, and stewardship passed down continuously. Local communities use this long-term data to track highly specific correlations,
Like what?
like how the exact ripening schedules of cloudberries and lowbush cranberries align with subtle shifts in local microclimates.
Yes. Or they track shifts in salmon migration timing based on minute changes in water temperatures and seasonal indicators. It is incredibly precise systems modeling, rooted in a profound responsibility to place, recorded and refined through oral histories and cultural practices, rather than just stored on a hard drive.
It really proves that true scientific understanding requires multiple ways of knowing.
It absolutely does.
So we've covered the deep mechanics, we've scaled from mitochondria all the way up to oceanic salmon runs, we've explored the limitations of models and the depth of traditional ecological knowledge. Now let's talk about how you, the listener, actually apply this.
Yeah, let's get practical.
Because I was looking through the Bioforge field journals, and they have this brilliant visual hack for mapping systems.
It is a very practical way to translate all this high-level theory onto a physical piece of paper. And it's interesting, the historical icon Bioforge uses to symbolize systems thinking is an insect, specifically a beetle.
I love that choice. Because a beetle is highly complex, filled with tiny interacting internal subsystems with clear inputs like food and oxygen and outputs like waste.
Yep.
But it's contained within this hard physical boundary, the exoskeleton. It's like a perfect handheld system.
Exactly. So when you want to map a system in your own Bioforge journal, the curriculum uses a specific visual language. You use a color called moss circuit green to draw a large, bold box on your page. That is your system box diagram.
So the green box is your boundary. Everything you decide to draw inside that box is the system. Everything outside the box is the external universe.
Right.
And then you draw bold arrows crossing the green lines to represent your inputs pushing into the system and your outputs escaping it.
Let's run a mental simulation to see how flexible this tool really is. Imagine you are studying a localized forest fire.
Okay.
Because you control the boundary, you could draw two completely different system boxes depending on what you actually want to learn.
Let's start with the microscale.
Okay, box A. I want to study the strict chemical reaction of the fire. So I take my moss circuit green pen and draw a tight, small boundary just around a single burning log.
My inputs, the arrows crossing into the box, are atmospheric oxygen and the physical cellulose of the wood. Inside the boundary, the interaction is the violent release of heat combustion.
And what comes out?
My outputs, the arrows crossing out of the green box, are carbon dioxide gas, water vapor, and ash.
Now, that model isolates the chemistry perfectly, but what if you wanted to study the macro-scale ecological impact of that exact same fire?
That's box B. Now I draw a massive green boundary around the entire river valley. The inputs crossing into the system are large-scale weather patterns, wind speed, and humidity dropping over the mountains.
Right.
The internal interactions of the fire physically leaping between different types of timber and destroying specific animal habitats. And my outputs crossing out of the green box are entirely different now. It's things like herds of caribou migrating out of the valley to escape, or tons of soil erosion washing past the boundary line into the river weeks later.
Same forest fire, two completely different systems. It all just depends on where you draw the line.
So what does this all mean for you as you dive into this? Whether you are mapping the combustion of a log staring into a cold Alaskan tide pool, or writing code for a supercomputer projecting the global climate 50 years from now, systems thinking is the ultimate tool for organizing the chaos of reality.
The essential takeaway here is really about relationships. To understand any living system, you must study both the individual parts and the forces connecting them.
Right.
Because knowing the name of every gear will never tell you how a clock works. You have to understand the tension, the friction, the interaction.
We've spent this entire deep dive talking about drawing boundaries around cells and bears and forest fires. But before we sign off, think about this. Taking systems thinking to its absolute limit, the Earth itself is just a nested subsystem.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Right? It is one small component interacting inside the boundary of a solar system, which is just a subsystem inside a galaxy. Are we, right now, just microscopic interacting parts of a cosmic emergent property that we are simply too small to comprehend?
Mind-blowing.
Definitely something to think about the next time you look up at the night sky. But bringing it all back down to Earth, we want to leave you with one final thought to explore on your own. Take a look out your window or look around your classroom and see if you can finish this sentence. One system I can observe is